Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for tuning in this morning. We're going to be covering module material from both Module 6 to kind of wrap up Module 6 and from Module 7 today. We're going to be starting Module 7 today. As I mentioned last week, we're going to kind of be bridging some of the gaps in these modules coming up since their due dates are on Thursdays. So we're going to get a little bit in 1 week and a little bit in the next week. And I think maybe this week I might post an additional video instead of trying to cram the rest into next Thursday's live class, just because some of the positioning stuff when it comes to CSS can be a little challenging. So I might just post something that was previously recorded so you all can get a little more information on that as we kind of progress here. I have completed the grading from the previous module, from Module 5. So everything that was turned in for Module 5, you should have a grade for that in your grade book now. Don't forget to look at the feedback on that. Most of you all did really well. Some of you all got a little overzealous with deleting some stuff from the template, and you'll want to make sure you check that to get that correct. It's not going to hurt us too much in the HTML module. I think you all have pretty well found out that HTML is pretty forgiving. HTML kind of just lets us do whatever we want. I mean, it is a markup language, so we can get away with a lot because there's not really much programmatically happening, and our browsers can fill in a lot of the gaps for us. But missing those different pieces of structure in the future is going to cause us some trouble. Right? So we want to make sure that we get all those pieces of structure back in, all the template pieces and things of that nature. And I did go over how to set up your template in this live class last week. So you didn't lose any points if you accidentally deleted something from your template, because it still worked, right? And that the rubric was just looking for what the rubric was looking for. But when we get into CSS and we get into JavaScript over the next few weeks, that will cause a bunch of problems if you don't go back and fix that. So for right now, it's good. It's fine. No big issues. But in the near future, it will be a problem. So you want to just make sure that your template is correct. With that being said, I think I have all the announcements out of the way. So we can go ahead and continue on the work that we're going to be doing. I am continuing with the same template that I was using last week, and I am monitoring for questions, by the way. I'm monitoring the chat, monitoring Teams, monitoring email. So in case you have a question, go ahead and send it on in while we're working here. But we're going to look at multimedia this week for a few moments, and we're going to start looking at CSS. And doing CSS positioning and different things like that. So let's look at adding some media here. And last week I did links, right? So here's a link. I also did lists. I have a list here. If I wanted to get a list of links, I would just put links inside of these list items, wrapping that text, right? That was one of the things that we talked about last week. Was that if we want something to be a part of something else, we just have to make sure that it is fully encapsulated inside of the tags for that other thing. Right, so I also did this relative link to the new page and to one for a home page. So we're going to be working with media today, which means we're going to be working with Cloudinary. That was one of the sites that was suggested to you all to get an account for. You're going to need that for this module, for the media. And we're going to be working with Cloudinary. So you create a Cloudinary account. The basic thing that you need out of the Cloudinary account is the digital asset management. There are a lot of different things that you can do for the Cloudinary account. I have my Cloudinary account kind of set up to do a whole bunch of stuff with programmable media and all this kind of stuff. But for our purposes, right, we're just going to worry about our digital asset management, which is this little orange icon here on the left side. Looks kind of like 2 or 3 overlapping squares with a circle or something in the middle of them. And specifically the media library. And so you can see this is where I have a lot of media for different classes, right? I've got videos, I've got audio, I've got pictures, all sorts of different stuff. There is a folders area here. If we go across the top, there's a folders tab. So if we want to get into a specific folder, or basically just arrange our stuff better so it makes more sense to us, we'd want to use this folders tab across the top. And I have a CTI 110 folder in here, so I'm just going to double click into that and show you all some stuff here. So I've got this picture here. And this is a big picture, so I don't necessarily want to use that one for this project. Right? Because the thing about pictures is that when I put a picture on a website, I can put a picture on a website as big or as small as I want it to be. And I can use CSS to resize that picture. But what happens is if I use a huge picture like this, right, it's going to be enormous. Let's see if I can get this to be full size, view actual size here. And so if I tried to use this picture as is, just on my page, right, that's not going to do very well for me, right? Because it's going to be that size on my website without me figuring out the size of it some other way. Right, so I either need to use CSS to resize it or resize it some other way. If I were to use CSS to resize it, it would still be loading that giant picture, but it would just be shrinking it down after it's loaded, which means that it would still download that full download size, which this is a 5 megabyte picture, right? That's a huge picture. So we wouldn't want to, especially if we were on mobile or something like that, we wouldn't want to waste our users' bandwidth to have to download a 5 megabyte picture. Before they're able to use the site. Now, in Cloudinary, there's actually a way that we can resize this picture. So if I go and click the 3 dot button right here, I can see a little edit icon appear. And before I do that, let me just talk about uploading, because I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me do a little bit of uploading here and just show you that. If I were to upload a picture, uploading a picture here is pretty simple, right? We have an upload button here that you can click on, and you can follow this menu. You can actually take a web address as long as it has a .jpeg or a .png, somewhere else on the internet, and just paste it in here, and it'll upload it right to your site for you. You can Google search images from here. You can get them from Shutterstock. If you pay for these services, Unsplash here is a free service. We just have to connect to it, Facebook, Instagram, right? A lot of different options to be able to upload pictures through here. But even simpler than that, if that picture is on your computer, then let's see, I have this picture of a video gaming Yeti that I made with some generative AI here. All I have to do is just take this picture and just drag it from my Explorer window into my web browser, and it'll just upload it right to the window. And now it's on Cloudinary, ready to use. Which is pretty cool. Right, it's simple to upload assets to Cloudinary. And so you can do that with audio, you can do that with video. Right, just drag it, just download it to your computer, open it up in your Windows Explorer, find it in your, pictures folder or your downloads folder or whatever, and just drag it over, right? Like I have this little cartoon Yeti that I drew. I can just drag this in here as well. And it'll add that in there for me. Right, easy peasy. So now if my image is too big, right, let's go ahead and use my gaming Yeti here, just because he's a little more fun. If my image is too big, I can go in and I can shrink him down. I can go and click that little 3 dot icon right there. I can select edit. And then you'll see I have a resize and crop option here. And I can use these sliders here to resize, and it'll automatically resize and scale down my image. And then I can use this URL down here as the clipboard, or copy that URL to the clipboard. And, if we save this image, we'll see that not only did it shrink my Yeti image, but it actually made it smaller, right? It's 17 kilobytes here from that download. If we look in the pictures folder, right, let me get back over there and find that same picture and look at the properties of that picture. It was 500 kilobytes there, right? So it's actually creating virtually a smaller picture that it is just kind of programmatically doing via this URL here. And now I can use it in my site. And so for images, I would use an image tag. And I'm just going to insert my image tag right here under my H1 tag. I'm going to go ahead and put a comment in here just so you all can refer to this. Image tag make sure image extension is on the end of the URL. Because that's something that people get a little bit confused about, right? Is that, they try to put an image into a website. They go to Google or something and they find this link and they copy it and they paste it and then it doesn't work. And then they discover that the link was actually to a web page or to some other, sort of weird structure that's not exactly, hosting the image. And so we want to have stuff on our servers, on places where we are able to use things easily. One, because it makes life a little bit easier for us. And two, because we shouldn't be stealing other people's bandwidth, right? Like if you try to use a URL that's on somebody else's server to put the image on your website, every time somebody comes to your website makes a call out to that server to get that picture and pull it back, right? So, while it might not be much, it's putting an additional strain on their server for something that's yours, right? So it's more ethical to put something on a site that allows us to use it, like Cloudinary. And so our image tag is actually a self-closing tag, which is pretty cool. Right? That means it doesn't have a closer that goes with it. It is self-closing. So it is a singular tag. There is no closing image tag. So we're going to use img src. And src here is going to be our source. Right? So we're going to use our source attribute, and that's what we're going to set equal to the URL that we just copied from Cloudinary. So we're going to paste that in there like that. And we're going to add another attribute here called the alt attribute. And so the alt attribute is for people with screen readers, right? People who are blind or visually impaired, who are accessing the internet with a screen reader. Some newer screen readers actually have some nice AI stuff kind of built into them that actually allow it to generate a description of an image for the user. But in general, we want to make sure that we put this alternate text in there, because the alternate text isn't just describing the image, or it shouldn't just be describing the image. It should actually be describing the purpose of the image, right? Because typically when we use a website on an image, or we flip it and reverse it, when we use an image on a website, we're using it for some sort of reason. Right? So in doing so, we want to describe the reason why we're doing it. And if it's just decoration, then it doesn't really matter if somebody who is blind or visually impaired can see the visual decorations that we've added to a website. So we can have something that can just be decorative. And if it has a purpose in between the quotes here of your alt tag in this string, you want to type out the purpose of the image, whatever that purpose is, right? But if it's just decorative, if you just put the alt tag with empty quotes, then that will indicate to a screen reader that this is a decorative image and it can just kind of skip it over. All right, so it's not wasting anybody's time. And so we'll just leave this one as a decorative image here. And we'll add the self-closer to this. So instead of just the greater than symbol at the end of the tag, I'm going to add a slash greater than here. That indicates that my tag is a self-closer, so I don't need a closing tag to go with it. All right, there is nothing else that is encapsulated in this image tag, so it does not have a pair to go with it. So this is just our image, right? So we have less than img. We have a source attribute that gives us the URL to our image, which is on our Cloudinary server. And we have an alt set to empty quotes to denote that it is decorative. Right? And so if we run this, we should see our Yeti show up on our page now. And there he is. Right, so we've added a Yeti image to our HTML here. And everything else works kind of similarly. Right, in fact, our video tag and our audio tag are basically the same thing. Right, so we can add a video tag and an audio tag to this relatively quickly. Instead of uploading a video or audio to this site, I'm just going to use some of the ones that I already have. To sort of work with this. So I'm going to go up to my home folder here and look for one of the video files that I have in here. And you'll know it's a video file because it'll have the little play button on it. And do I have video files in another folder? Probably this one. There we go. See, it has a little video icon on top of it. You can see that the audio file has a little musical note on top of it. That denotes that it is an audio file or a video file. And if I don't need to edit it in any way, which typically for audio and video, we don't need to do that, I can just click the less than greater than sign here when I hover over the thumbnail to copy the URL. And so now I have the URL copied to my clipboard, so I can just paste it into the site. Let's go down here to our subtopic of the main topic. Let's add a little comment here. Video tags. Make sure to add the control attribute so your users can start/stop a video. So there are a bunch of different attributes for video tags. Remember that the attribute is, what we put in the first tag, and we set it equal to some value. And so in this case, right, what we want to do is we want to use our video tags. So video is the tag. And there are other purposes for video tags, but for our little specific instance that we're doing here, right, we just want to be able to add a video to a website that users can play and do everything with. So we want to make sure that we add a controls attribute to our opening video tag here. And so the controls attribute just is a Boolean attribute, which means it's either true or false. Right? And so by default, video controls are actually false. Right? So in order to have controls show up on my video, I need to make sure to include the word controls in that opening tag. And that'll put the play button and the timeline and everything on the video so you can play and pause it. There are, for example, video headers, like we see on clevelandcc.edu, right? We have this video header here when it decides to load there. That is added the exact same way, but you'll notice that there aren't any controls on the video. And so that has if we leave that controls out of there and we set it to autoplay, it allows us to be able to create video hero headers like this. But again, for our purposes, since we're just getting started, I just want you all to be able to put a video in your HTML that will run when people play it. And so now I need to give this video a source. So I need to put a source tag in here. And source tag is a self-closing tag. Right? We don't want to confuse our source tag for our source attribute, like we saw up here with our image. Right? That is a source attribute. This is a source tag, and our source tag also has a source attribute. So if I put that source attribute in there and paste my URL, then it'll have my video in the site. That's all we really need to do to be able to put the video in there. I might also suggest that you add the type if you want, but that just gives your browser a little bit of better information about how to handle the video here. I mean, it knows, it can read the source and it knows MP4. So it's going to put it in there by default as an MP4. But if I gave it a type of video/MP4, since that is the file name here, MP4, right? If your video was not an MP4, you would just replace that with whatever type of file your video was. So if it was a MOV, that would be MOV. If it was an OGG, an OGG, if you found an OGG video somewhere, that would be OGG. But it's not really going to have much of a difference. So now we have our video here, and let's see it on our full-size page. You can see by default it's paused. Right, I have all my controls here, and I can play it. And we can see the animation on this video is kind of subtle, but you can kind of see it there as it's playing through. This is a public domain video from NASA showing like the flow through the spot on Jupiter, right? So it's a very subtle video. But pretty simple. And what's great is that the tags for video and the tags for audio are basically the same. There's only one kind of key difference to them, right? So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go down here to this new main topic, and I'm going to put a little comment here for that. I'm just going to paste that right in there. Now for video here, I can just change the word video to audio. And I can just change the link on my source accordingly. Right, so if I go back to my cloud area here, I have my NASA launch sound here. I can copy that URL, drop it in right here. That is an MP3 file, so I'm going to change this from video MP3 or video MP4 to audio MP3. And I have a little audio player here on my site. Now, if you don't put the word controls here, your user will have no way of knowing this even exists, right? Like if I take this out and run this, like it doesn't show up there at all. Right? So I want to make sure I put controls in here for that. Right, for video, I can not have controls in there and it'll still show the video and show the video where the video is. And for example, if we added it, even if we added like say the the autoplay Boolean, then it would start playing our video by default, even though there are no controls on the video. You know, there are other things that we can do to loop it and all that sort of stuff. But again, right, for our purposes, we just want to be able to put a video on our website that we can control. Without the controls, we wouldn't be able to see our audio file at all. And I can unmute my desktop audio for a minute just so I can play this and you all can hear it. You can kind of hear it coming through. A little bit of clapping there. When the rocket takes off, you'll really be able to hear it. But you can see we have play pause. We have... There it goes. We have a timeline that we can scrub through. We have audio controls, and we have a little button here. It gives us some other options. Now, the appearance of these are gonna change from browser to browser. So I'm in Opera here, and if I were to go into, say, Microsoft Edge, and look at this same website. And I actually don't think these will look any different because Edge is a Chromium-based browser, just like Opera. Let's see, do I have Firefox on this machine? Let me check. All right, here is Firefox. If we paste this website into here, you can see that the video player looks a little bit different between Firefox and a Chromium-based browser. And when I say Chromium, I mean like Google Chrome or Opera GX or Microsoft Edge, anything that uses Chromium as a base. And we can also see that the audio player looks very different. And so that's going to change based on the browser when you're just using these default tags. And that's basically it when it comes to multimedia, right? And so now I can we can move from here into talking about some CSS. And, once again, remember that, I will be giving you I'll be putting this link back into the recording when we put the recording out again. So you'll be able to go in here and look at this. But it's fairly simple to comprehend, right? We got our media onto our site now. So now on this site, I have links, lists, image, video, audio, H1s, H2s, H3s, right? All sorts of stuff that can do basically everything we need. Now, when it comes to CSS is just about visuals. Right, so we're just going to change gears completely and start to go in on CSS now. When it comes to CSS is just about visuals. So when I'm changing CSS, right, like one of the things that I talk about with HTML quite a bit is that HTML is kind of like the blueprint. I'm kind of laying out the room when I'm in HTML. And with CSS, I'm kind of putting the paint on the walls, I'm adding furniture, I'm doing all this sort of stuff to make it more visually appealing. And in our first CSS module, we're looking at positioning content, which is, moving things around, basically arranging the furniture in the room. And we're looking at resizing and doing things like that. Right, and so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to do some demonstrations with some things that I have here. One of the things to talk about are selectors. Right, and so here in our HTML, we have different tags, and these different tags all have a value. Right, and so for example, I have these paragraph tags. And if I wanted to do something to affect every paragraph, I can use the element selector, right? Element selector. To be able to select all of the elements of a particular type. And so when I go into the CSS file here, this is where I write that information. And remember that because I have this in the head of my document, this link href equals style.css, rel equals style sheet, type equals text/css, then my HTML here can see this file here, and it can know to apply what we're doing in the CSS to what we have on this page. Right, so if you don't have that in your document, you're going to want to make sure to put that back in. So I can go here and we see I already have a bit of CSS here that was generated in the template. And this is just to make the site basically be full width. By default, right, if we comment this out, which a comment in CSS is a little different. Right, it is / asterisk to open a comment / asterisk to close a comment. It's a little different, and really we can't even tell much of a difference here if we remove that. Probably based on some stuff that our browser's adding by default. In some of the old ways of doing things, there'd be extra padding, there'd be something added on there. We don't really need that, right? Because by default, that's basically what it is. So we could remove that and get rid of it. But what we see here is a good way to kind of talk about CSS, right? Because what we have here is a full set of CSS rules. Right? The first thing that we have here is the selector. And so this is an element selector. Right? When we're using an element selector, we're just writing the name of the element that we are trying to select. And it'll select every element of that type on a page. Right? So, as I was saying, if I wanted to select every paragraph of the type on a page, I would just use my P element selector. And then we see I have these curly braces. Or braces. People make distinctions between like braces and brackets and all this kind of stuff. I will always say curly braces just so, we can kind of keep things delineated. Curly braces and square brackets and all that sort of stuff. And so if I go into, I'm putting this pair of curly braces here. And so whatever is inside of these curly braces are going to be applied to my selector. And so each of the lines inside my curly braces, each of those are a singular rule. Right? And so these rules are being applied to this selector. So height 100%, width 100%. So it's going to set the height of the HTML, which is the root, right? It's the root tag of my HTML, to be 100% of the window, and the width likewise. Right, so let's say I wanted to do something with these paragraphs. Right now, these paragraphs go all the way across the page. let's say I wanted to make them only about 800 pixels wide, which this monitor is 1920 by 1080. So if we kind of looked at that, 1800 pixel or 800 pixels wide would be roughly, right here ish. And so I can set a width on all of these paragraphs of, say, 800 pixels, px for pixels. Notice no space here, right? If we put a space in there, it breaks it. But once I do that, it'll take every set of paragraph tags, and it's hard to tell here because this window's smaller, but if we go over here, we can see it fairly easily. It takes all of these paragraph tags and it puts them, makes them smaller. Right, which is pretty cool. Right, so our element selector is one tag. We also have a class selector. And so if I have multiple HTML tags that I want to have a certain effect applied, but I don't want it applied to every tag with that element, I can give those HTML tags a class. So I can set class, I can set a class attribute in the opening tag for that element. And I'm using paragraph tags here. It could be any element, right? We can take any element and make it bigger or smaller using these same sort of techniques. But we'll give this a class of, say, short. We can make our class whatever we want it to be called. And we can use a class on as many different elements as we want to use it on. In our HTML, right? And I have one here on the paragraph that is underneath our video, and one here on the second paragraph of the main topic. And so a class selector takes greater precedence over the paragraph selector in our HTML. So if I add a dot short here, the dot denotes that it is a class selector. Short is the name of the class. I add my curly braces here. Then I can make an even shorter width. Let's make a 640 pixel width. Run this. And now we can see that select paragraphs are shorter in length, right? This one's short, this one's short. So on and so forth. I will let the other video that I post, just because it's a bit more than I want to try to cram into the next 10 minutes or so, explain positioning. So we'll skip positioning today and we'll just move on to, we'll do the ID selector, which is the next one. And then we'll do centering, and we'll let the other video cover the other material. So if I wanted to have one item among a bunch of items have a particular styling, then I use an ID selector. And I denote that item in my HTML by giving it an ID attribute. So here on this first paragraph, I will give an ID equals long. Only one item can have a specific ID. Right? This is to specifically call out one element that is a part of many other elements that can have this tag. Right, and so in my CSS, I denote an ID with a hashtag and the name. So it would be long. And again, notice no spaces. And if I made this one a little longer, let's say 1024 pixels, then that's going to override what's been done before. And so now I have this one longer paragraph, this shorter paragraph, this shorter paragraph, this medium length paragraph, and this medium length paragraph. Right, so this is our element selector. This is our class selector. And this is our ID selector. Now, this does bring up a couple good points when it comes to how CSS works, right? Like if I added another element selector here at the end for the paragraphs and set it at a different width, let's say 1800 pixels, and I am going to go back and delete this back out, we see some interesting changes, right? So when we go down here on items that don't have an ID or a class on them, we see that those are extended out to be the 1800 pixel width. And so this gets me to the idea of the cascade. Right, basically it goes through top to bottom and just does everything in order. Right, so it sees p tag here. It says, okay, I got to set all paragraphs to 800 pixels. Does these things, and it says, oh, I got to set all paragraphs to 1800 pixels. But it also looks at something called specificity. And specificity is based on selector, and you could basically think about it as like a score. Right, so we can basically say like my element selector has a score of 1, my class selector has a score of 2, and my ID selector has a score of 3. And so what it's going to do is it's going to apply the rules to whatever element meets these rules or meets these qualifications and has a higher score. Right? So when we look at paragraph, short, and long here, they all have a width rule. Remember that all of those items on our page that we've been manipulating are paragraphs. So they all meet this paragraph element selector. We just got a little bit more specific with adding classes. So when we're adding a particular rule, if it is the same rule, whichever element has the higher score for specificity, whether it is, using a element selector, a class selector, or an ID selector, whatever rule has the highest score is what's going to get applied to that element on the page. So if it has a class and an ID, and both the class and the ID have width in it, then it's going to give it the width of the ID because that has the highest score. Now, if the rule is not carried on, if it's not the same rule from element to class to ID, then it's going to get applied to everything that meets that category. For example, we don't talk about color until module 8, but if I add color here to just change the color of my text to red, you can see that even though I did this in the P tag, all of the paragraphs are red. Right? Because all of the paragraphs still meet the paragraph rule, even if they have a class or an ID attribute attached to them. But there's nothing overriding it that has higher specificity in your class or ID elements. Right? So for example, if I went in here and added color blue to my classes that have dot short, then you'll see that my two short paragraphs are now blue because that overrides the red because it's more specific. And for all intents and purposes, we could even move this color down here to this last paragraph at the end of our cascade. And we can see that that's still true, right? The items that have the class selector with the class attribute that are made blue are still blue because the class selector is more specific. So its rule takes precedence over any other rules for selectors that match that element, right? It's a bit sort of, a lot to wrap your head around there, right? But we can see that kind of in action here. And I'll even add like 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. And so for the sake of the site that we're going to make, I'm going to kind of change these around. I'm going to make that 1800, this 800. Because I want to be able to first center everything that's on the page. So I want to be able to center everything from main topic on down to here. I want to put it just like down the middle of the page, basically. If we were to look at this, I want to just kind of put it down the center. And so we can do that. What I'm going to be able to do that is I'm going to wrap everything that I want to be centered. So I'm going to go underneath this, go to a new page, navigation link, and I'm going to add an opening main tag. I'm going to take the closing main tag, cut it, and paste it down at the bottom here after my last paragraph. And so now we've used a main tag to wrap all the content on the site. And so now to position all the content on the site, I can write CSS to impact the main tag. Main is just one of a series of container tags, main, div, section, header, footer. There are all sort of HTML tags that are just sort of container tags that we can kind of manipulate for this purpose. So if I go into my CSS here, and I add the main element selector, some curly braces, and margin 0 auto. So in looking at margin here, the first number covers top and bottom. The second thing that we have here covers left and right. And so I've set it to be auto. And auto basically just tells it to go as far over from the left and as far over as from the right as it can go. And so if it's going as far over from the left and as far over from the right as it can go, then it's going to meet in the middle. Now, if we just run this as is, we'll see that nothing happens. Right? This doesn't change our site at all. And that's because by default, things have a width of 100 pixels. Or 100%, rather, not 100 pixels. It's going to be 100% of the window. So if I want to see this visually centered, I need to make my width and shrink it to make my width smaller. And once I do that, if I look at my full page here, you can see everything's down the center. Of the page as we want. Now, the only thing that might be challenging would be to do images. For example, if I wanted this particular Yeti image, and really the same thing goes for videos and audio as well, I'm going to give this image an ID of Yeti. So I can use an ID selector to select it. And if I just go into CSS here, and I focus my ID of Yeti, and I go margin 0 auto, and run that, nothing is going to change. And that's because by default, image elements are inline elements. Right? An image element is an inline element, whereas things like a header, or rather a heading, I should say, a heading, a paragraph, those are block elements. And so I need to tell my browser to not look at this image like an inline element, but to look at this element as a block element. So if I go in here and add display block to this, then that will change my browser's point of view from looking at this as an inline element and have it look at it as a block element. So if we run that and we go over here, we can now see that's centered up nicely. On our site. So we've centered our image, we've centered all of our content. When we get to talking about color and fonts, we'll talk more about centering text. You can do that in a similar manner, right? You'll notice that I set width on things, but I didn't necessarily set height on things. You can set a height on something. It's harder to display at this point in the game, right? But you can set a height on something. One of the things that I do show to kind of demonstrate that you can set a height on something is I add a border. So if I add a border that's, say, 2 pixels in solid here to this long, and then I give it a height of, say, 400 pixels. Then if we look here, we can see the border denotes the width and the height. Typically, I don't set heights on things like that. I just kind of let the content dictate where it goes, because unless you set the height the way we've done here, then the content will just flow accordingly and make its height be whatever it needs to be. But when you set the height, then it gives it height. And some other things that we talk about here are like padding, right? If I want to get some padding on this, that's going to separate that from the border and things of that nature. But we will let the other video handle all of that content. So we'll go ahead and wrap up here for today. We've done the hour. So if you have any questions, you can put them in chat, send me an email, send me a Teams message really quickly. If you have any questions for today, I'm going to be giving you this site that we have here so you can see it and look at it. Don't forget that you can take these and you can fork them and you can kind of play with them on your own Replit so you can get some practice in. Right, that's something important that we can do. But we'll just wait a minute or two for questions here just to see if anybody has any questions. And while we're waiting, once again, as I always say, if you are watching the recording, then, as you're watching the recording, feel free to, add your questions, send me your questions whenever you have them. But I will be putting another video with this video when I send this recording out, just so you all have some more context leading into next week. And one of the things that might be interesting to do would be to, if we get all the content covered between this video and the pre-recorded video, just answering questions, if anybody has them kind of remaining from from what would be module 7, then we can kind of start off next week's live with that. So since I'm not seeing any questions come up in the chat, we'll go ahead and get to wrapping up here. Once again, if you think of a question later or you're watching the recording and you think of a question, feel free to send it in to me via email or Teams. That's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.